In 1686, King Louis XIV had a problem that was a real pain in the ass. He had developed a fistula in ano, and something needed to be done about it. If you're not aware what a fistula is, I'll explain in a bit, but I know a lot of you like to watch my videos while eating, so don't worry, I promise I won't get very graphic. Anyway, surgery in the 17th century was risky and often fatal business, so it was a scary and high-stakes undertaking. The Sun King was willing to take that risk, and after a very painful and unsedated butt surgery, the king was cured of his back-end woes. Now, the legend goes that following the news of the king's brave decision and his successful recovery, which saved his life, the nobles of Versailles all went nuts and started getting fistula surgeries left and right in order to gain some of the respect the king had initiated, making having an anal fistula very fashionable and leading people to even wear wound dressings around their butts, like a diaper, to give the impression of having undergone the royal surgery. Okay, so it sounds ridiculous, right? But it definitely sounds like the type of stupid, weird shit that the aristocrats of Versailles would have done. At least, based on the impression of them we have from similar popular stories. After all, the Google AI summary says that this happened. Of course it must be true. This story about the nobles and their demand for fistula operations is literally rampant. I've seen and heard it for years. But given that other Versailles legends have proven to be untrue, like the persistent story of nobles pooping in the hallways of Versailles, somehow butts and poop are always involved? I couldn't help but wonder, did this really happen? Come learn with me. But first, a word from today's sponsor, Babbel. In working on this video, I had to read through so many documents in French, many of which did not have English translations. Thankfully, I've been using Babbel to improve my French skills, which really came in handy. Babbel is one of the top language learning apps in the world, making it so easy to take language lessons with you wherever you go when you need it. Plus, it's February and Valentine's Day is here, and it's a great time to connect with your loved ones with a love language, like French. In just 3 weeks using Babbel, you can get started competently speaking a language, helping you connect better with the various cultures around you, or enhancing your travel experiences. The lessons are designed by real language experts, helping guide you towards relevant and useful real-life conversational skills. I'm so excited to put my improved French knowledge to the test when I visit France again this year. Also, let me know in the comments what language you're currently learning or would like to learn. I love hearing about that. It's really exciting seeing how everyone likes to expand their knowledge. You can use my link in the description below to get 55% off your Babbel subscription. So head on over to get started learning and expanding your world experience. Thank you so much to Babbel for sponsoring this video, and now let's get back to learning about Louis XIV and his grand operation. Per usual, I think we need to start off with an overview of the story. Here's what happened. King Louis XIV, aka the Sun King, was never a particularly healthy fellow. He ascended the throne of France at just 4 years old, right in the midst of extreme political turmoil. Not only was the 30 Years' War raging, but the consolidation of power in favor of the crown led to rampant parliamentary frustration and then civil war. As a result, the young king's childhood was fraught with fear and paranoia, and he knew that it would be imperative for him to regain the trust of the nobility in order to stabilize his power. Having been well educated in the arts, he sought to build a grand palace at the location of his father's Versailles hunting lodge, far away from the tensions of Paris, and he invited the nobles to come join him in all of its opulence and splendor. The resulting palace, and soon-to-be center of all French politics, was enormous and outrageous, nothing ever before seen. From Versailles, Louis eventually won the admiration of most of the nobility, who all scrambled over each other to incur royal favor. The nobles, all now living at Versailles in close proximity, found themselves engaging in increasingly ridiculous behaviors to do this, which obviously sets the foundation for our story today. Anyway, Louis's health was always in shambles. As a child, he had smallpox, leaving him with scarred skin, and later he struggled with the same gastrointestinal illness that plagued his father. His teeth had to be removed, his skin was constantly infected, he suffered headaches, gout, measles, rheumatism, gonorrhea, loads of tumors and abscesses. One of these abscesses appeared early in 1686 when it was reported in the Royal Journal of the King's Health. His Majesty today complained of a small tumor towards the perineum, approximately 2 finger breadths from the anus. Uh-oh. The king has a butt problem. This isn't actually shocking at all. Butt problems were really common in the French aristocracy due to varying factors like diet, lack of regular exercise, lots of horseback riding. Actually, the horseback riding was believed to have been the cause of the king's booty abscess, but we don't really know for certain. Sometimes butt problems show up randomly. They're way more common even today than most are willing to admit. You or someone you love has a butt problem. Eat more fiber. You all need to eat more fiber and get colonoscopies. But I digress. Anyway, Louis was 10 types of fucked up, and obviously for a guy that needs to sit on a throne a lot, and not just the porcelain throne, a butt abscess is kind of life-ruining. Oh my god, I can already hear the comments coming. Oh, because the porcelain toilet wasn't invented until the 19th century. Blah. Shut up. Shut up. I know. So the thing about having a butt abscess, or really any abscess in the 17th century, is largely you might be fucked because surgery was absolutely not a reliable thing. Physicians largely did not do it, and surgery was performed by the Guild of Barber Surgeons. Like actual barbers who also did surgery, that was part of their job. I literally remember where I was when I learned about this as a child. I was reading the Felicity's World book. The thing is though, barber surgeons were extremely looked down upon, especially by physicians who were often higher class or much more highly educated. Barber surgeons still had a moderate education though, and the surgeon barbers had even more of it. Very slim distinction between the two, by the way. So it's not like they were uneducated, but obviously the nobility's first line of defense for any health issue was going to be a respectable physician. Unfortunately, French physicians at the time were not super great or interested in medical innovation. They heavily relied on an old school of thinking, the Galenic theory of medicine, believing that any new discoveries in medicine was quackery. This mode of thought was pushed as far as it could possibly go when it came to the king. We know everything there is to know about Louis's medical treatments because it was heavily recorded by his team of doctors in the Royal Health Journal, Journal de la Santé du Roi, which catalogued his health woes from 1647 to 1711 by his doctors Antoine Daquin, Guy Cresson-Fagon, and Antoine Vallot. Louis's team of royal physicians tried everything: enemas, mineral waters, poultices, bloodletting. They even tried cauterizing it with a red-hot iron. The royal butt infection only got worse. Obviously at this point, an actual surgeon was like, hey guys, maybe we ought to drain this thing? After a lot of bickering, because who does this guy think he is, they agreed to drain it, but the various bullshit they covered the wound with led to another infection. Subsequent treatment managed to heal the wound, but this had created a different issue altogether. The king now had an actual fistula. Alright, so if you're not aware, what is a fistula? Basically, it's a passage in the body where there shouldn't be one, like a tunnel. So an anal fistula is kind of like a random tunnel from the rectum to somewhere else. Sorry, gross, ew, I know. Anyway, you can put poultices and leeches on a fistula all you want, it's not gonna do anything. They finally had to do the thing they were all loath to do. It's time to call in a barber surgeon. The guy they called up was Charles-François Félix, the royal surgeon who was following in the footsteps of his father, who had also been Louis's royal surgeon. Félix requested 6 months to properly prepare for the surgery, which he knew was extremely risky and dire. He spent his time practicing on numerous fistula-suffering patients in Paris, many of whom died. He also developed a special, spooky-looking scalpel for the job. Finally, it was time to operate on the royal booty ass. The Royal Health Journal's very brief remark on the surgery goes, on November 18th, having returned to Versailles, the king long resolved to have the operation performed to cure his fistula without informing anyone except those necessary for a matter of such great importance, at about 8 o'clock in the morning, Monsieur Félix, in the presence of the Marquis de Louvois, myself, Monsieur Fagon, assisted by Monsieur Bessières, inserted a probe at the end of a specially made scalpel all the way along the fistula into the intestine, which he joined with the finger of his right hand, and, withdrawing it downwards, opened the fistula with considerable ease, and then, having inserted scissors into the rectum through the wound, he cut the intestine a little above the opening and cut all the bands that were found in the intestine, which the king endured with great constance. 1 hour later, he was bled from the arm. The surgery was an enormous success, but importantly, it and the king's condition altogether had been fully kept a secret from the court and the public. Aside from some internal letters from people close to him and various rumors that he was unwell, people had no idea that the king's butt was killing him. The king handled the operation really well, remaining mostly silent, which is really impressive given how painful it must have been, plus the lack of sedation. He even held counsel from his bed right after the surgery, seeming quite cheerful and singing songs. Within a few days, Louis was back on his feet. The royal behind was cured. Now we must return to the wild allegation, perpetuated by numerous history accounts and AI summaries, that following Louis' successful surgery, having a fistula became so fashionable that people were rushing to get the fistula surgery and were telling everybody that they had a fistula and were walking around with bandages around their butts. I remember hearing this little factoid years ago while listening to the Sawbones podcast, and I gotta be honest, I didn't even question it because, duh, French nobles were wacky little freaks, weren't they? Sounds like something they'd do. I've even had numerous people tell me that they learned about this from tour guides while visiting Versailles. This doesn't surprise me at all because I also heard about those tour guides perpetuating the false claim that Versailles nobles were pissing and shitting in the halls of the palace because there were no bathrooms. This is not even remotely true, and I addressed it in detail years ago in my video on TikTok's historical misinformation. So, revisiting this claim today, now with a lot more research behind me, it sounded kinda fishy. Something's off here, and I want to find out where this idea came from and if it's true or not. I began my search at the very surface, Google, obviously. The first thing that comes up is that stupid fucking AI summary, which of course states this claim and cites a History Channel comedy video on Facebook as its source. I don't know why I have to keep saying this, but drunk history-esque comedy is not an educational resource. Laugh all you want, but don't assume you're learning anything.
However, the problem at hand remains. What to do about my asshole?
Yes.
Backtracing a bunch of these sources either led nowhere, as in unsourced claims, or to other random blog posts or Instagram posts. A couple of them, though, led to some papers, some of which finally cited a source. Histoire médicale du Grand Roi by Émile-Henri Raymond Deguerre, published in 1924. Deguerre was a doctor himself and published a bunch of medical history papers and books. This is easily my earliest source so far, and the one that a great deal of the modern references point to. On page 180, there it is, the statement that, quote, "Since this intervention, this disease became fashionable, and courtiers even chose Versailles to undergo this operation, knowing that the king was informed of all circumstances of this illness. Those who had some slight oozing or simple hemorrhoids did not hesitate to present their backsides to the surgeons to have incisions made. I saw more than 30, said Dionis, who wanted the operation performed on them, and those whose madness was so great they seemed shocked when they were told there was no need for surgery." Okay, this definitely seems like a solid lead. He's obviously referring to Pierre Dionis, another surgeon at Versailles, but the source he's citing, and thank God he actually cited a source, is Récit de la Grande Opération du Roi Louis XIV by Joseph Adrien Leroy. So I tracked down that book, which luckily is digitized on BNF Gallica. Published in 1852, this book gets us a little bit closer to the historical period we need to get to. The bad news is, 19th century history books are notoriously bad and tend to either blatantly lie or cite unreliable sources. The good news is, this book appears to be largely reprints of first-hand sources, with commentary by Joseph Échelon Lecroix, who, like Descartes, was a doctor and medical historian. He provides some commentary on the first-hand sources, quoting Pierre Dionis on page 19, saying that the success of the operation had just been performed on Louis XIV by crowning Félix's reputation also made this procedure fashionable, and it was easy to immediately ascertain its effectiveness, for since the operation was performed on the king, it seemed that everyone was afflicted with fistula. It is a disease, says Dionis, which has become fashionable since that of the king. Several of those who hid it previously were no longer ashamed to make it public. Then comes the same quote from before again, about the 30 courtiers afflicted with fistula madness. Here's the problem though. Where the fuck is this quote coming from? Lecroix does not cite anything at all. Pierre Dionis was the head surgeon to the Dauphin, and was kind of a weirdo. Long story, but it involves him making bizarro comments about his cousin's fertility and how he could get his own wife pregnant so easily. Freak. Anyway, I set off on my hunt to track down the original source of this quote from Dionis because it appears to be the most detailed one. I finally found it in his book, Cours d'Opération de Chirurgie, where on page 406 he writes, "It seems this disease is now more common than before. We hear every day of operations performed on people who are not bothered by it. It is a disease that has become fashionable since that of the king." And then the rest is the exact same quote as before. Okay, so there's our primary source. This book was published first in around 1707. Dionis died in 1717, around the same time as the king himself. Of course, at this point, I realized that I need to go back and check the first-hand account of all first-hand accounts, the actual Royal Health Journal itself. The entry on the surgery was written by Antoine Decazes, who, it seems, is our only other potential contemporary source to this claim. So, who was this guy? Well, he was a highly esteemed doctor, but was not very well liked. He was kind of a dickhead, and he really hated surgeons. This is probably why his mention of the fistula surgery in the Royal Health Journal is little more than one paragraph, with very little in the way of details. We get much more detail from Félix's own account of the surgery in an 18-page long document that sadly is almost impossible to locate online. I couldn't find it. It isn't hard to imagine that Decazes would have found it laughable that people would voluntarily seek out surgeons for their ailments following the royal operation. The sections of the Royal Health Journal written by Fajon, Decazes' successor, are laden with animosity towards Decazes and his medical beliefs. In Decazes' defense, all royal physicians, especially the head ones, as he was, had very strong opinions, and you kind of have to have sympathy for them and the incredible pressure on their shoulders to keep the absolute monarch, the head of the nation, alive and well, in an era still ruled by disease, operating still on the ancient system of the four humors. The royal physician was by the king's side most of the day. He was there when the king woke up every morning to check his vitals and his digestion. He was there at mealtimes to control the king's diet. He was there every night to do yet another health inspection. If the king fell ill, or was injured, or worse, died, the responsibility was on the royal physician's head. It's a terrible, stressful job, and all of these guys could do was their best with what knowledge they had. It's easy to be like, oh, look at how stupid these doctors were. Of course a poultice or special water or leeches isn't going to heal anything. These doctors were doing what they genuinely thought was the right thing to do under severe pressure. It's not fair to project our modern privilege of advanced medical knowledge onto people who genuinely did not know what we do. That said, Antoine Decazes was a pesky little fellow. His contempt for surgery actually led to the death of Queen Marie-Thérèse, King Louis XIV's wife, in 1683. When she developed a severe abscess in her underarm, Decazes vehemently opposed surgical treatment, despite Fajon insisting upon it. This led to her death of sepsis at only 45 years old, and Fajon was partly blamed for Decazes' foolishness, so of course he hated the guy. The thing is, Decazes' distaste for surgical intervention was partly fueled by the pressures of being a royal physician. Why take such risky invasive measures if gentler treatments might fix the issue instead? He was terrified of causing pain or anger in these monarchs at the risk of losing his own head. Decazes was dedicated to climbing the social ladder, after all. He came from a middle-class family and married Antoine Valo's niece, which got him the job at Versailles. The court did not like him. The king wasn't even really fond of him either, because he kept asking for grandiose favors. Eventually, his bad attitude and tendency to disappear randomly led him to being fired by the king, leaving Versailles in disgrace. The Duke of Saint-Simon recalled in his memoirs, "I found a change at court that has greatly surprised me. Decazes, first physician to the king, a creature of Madame de Montespan, had lost none of his credit by the separation of the mistress, but he had not succeeded with Madame de Maintenon due to his background. A great courtier, but a mercenary, miserly and greedy, seeking to establish his family by any means necessary. His brother, an ordinary physician, was worthless, and his son less so. The king grew weary of his importunities, which did not prevent him from requesting the title of Bishop of Tours for his son, an abbot who was moreover of good morals, wit, and learning. Madame de Maintenon opposed the realization of these plans. He was replaced by Guy Crescent Fajon on November 2nd, 1683. Taking this with a grain of salt, obviously Saint-Simon's memoirs are heavily biased. I read through Decazes' account of the Fistula operation in the Royal Health Journal, and obviously he makes absolutely no mention of fistula madness, because why would he? It's the official Royal Health Journal, not a gossip column in a newspaper. Which got me thinking, would the Mercure Galant, the official newspaper journal of Versailles, mention this at all? First, I had to wrap up either implicating or exonerating Decazes. I researched high and low for anything the guy could have possibly published that may have made this claim, because in the officially published edition of the Health Journal by Joseph-Adrien Leroy, all we get is Leroy's claim that it happened along with the quote from Pierre Dionis. I could not for the life of me find anything where Decazes personally claimed that there was a fistula craze. Annoying as he was, he's innocent here. So I turned my attention to Le Mercure Galant, which from what I can tell only makes mention of the fistula operation in December of 1686, 1 month after the operation. Mostly just to wax poetic about how cool and brave Louis was for undergoing the surgery. So in the end, the only genuine source we have is that quote from Dionis. The fistula craze is not mentioned at all in any other contemporary source that I could personally find. Not in Saint-Simon's memoirs, not in any letters, nothing. And that's what feels kind of fishy to me. If such a bizarre thing was happening, why did none of these other gossipy bitches say anything about it? If the nobles of Versailles were good at anything, it's gossiping and lying, especially if it gets them ahead socially, or if it can bring down someone they hate. Case in point, my video on Julie d'Aubigny is a great example of this. While it's entirely possible that someone might have made mention of it somewhere and I just missed it, I just really doubt that if fistulas really were all the rage at some point, someone would have said something. But as it stands, all we have is that one quote from Pierre Dionis, the surgeon to the Dauphine, and I think I have an idea of what was probably going on. First of all, we need to try and put ourselves in these people's shoes. They're very expensive shoes, and I hate doing that, because we all know that these were stupid aristocrats and eat the rich and all that, but bear with me. The court of Versailles was a game of 4D chess, and politics and intrigue. Louis XIV was the Sun King. All power stemmed directly from him. As a result, the nobles and courtiers orbited around him, all vying for a bit of royal acclaim. Many of them genuinely looked up to him. When it was announced that Louis had undergone such a frightening operation, an actually brave feat, the nation was shocked and wildly impressed by his courage. In an era where surgery was rare and most often ended in death, when there was no sedation and no pain management, it really was a very brave thing for him to do. And truthfully, he had no choice. The only other option, as he knew very well, was death by sepsis. So, a lot of people, upon hearing of his successful surgery, became heartened by the idea of having surgical interventions for their own ailments. It makes sense that the surgeons of Versailles, like Dionis and Felix, would have seen a large influx of people coming to ask for their help. They were seen as the best of the best, and in an era where surgery is so risky, you definitely want to be operated on by the best. Picture this. You're a French aristocrat, and you've been having butt problems that are kind of making your life miserable. No amount of non-invasive medicine is helping either. You hear that the king's fistula was cured by surgery, and you figure, wow, maybe I can get my issue handled surgically too. Maybe I've had a fistula this whole time and I had no idea. So you go to visit Pierre Dionis, who checks on you and is like, hey man, you've only got hemorrhoids, you really don't need surgery. Like, of course you're upset. So there's really nothing you can do? I have to just go back to trying shit that isn't helping? This might have been the madness that Dionis was speaking of. After having several of these meetings, the doctor was probably tired of it. Personally, I think that's what was happening. Butt problems were really common with the aristocracy back then for one reason or another, so obviously there's a high number of people seeking medical attention for it. And they probably weren't seeking out surgeons before. These people aren't doctors, they're just some losers of the court. How are they supposed to know that the fistula surgery wasn't going to help them? To be fair, the gory details of the operation were not publicly published. They didn't know the particulars of the treatment to know if it applied to them, just that it worked on the king and hey, it's worth a shot to ask. And mind you, I was not able to find any reference at all to nobles wearing bandages around their butts to make it look like they had just had a fistula surgery. So that's my take. Maybe we'll never know for sure, but also, because I know someone's gonna bring it up, there is a legend that says that following the king's operation, people began singing a song in his honor that eventually evolved into the British anthem God Save the King/Queen. We don't have any reliable evidence of this either. I looked. I know it would be really funny if this fanciful song was somehow linked to King Louis XIV's anal fistula. Sadly, I just don't know that it is. King Louis XIV passed away in 1715 after, once again, his physicians spurned the very thought of surgery, despite it having saved his life before. They assumed he had sciatica, but it turned out to be gangrene, and although the king begged for his leg to be amputated, by that point, the surgeons knew he couldn't be saved. Of course, this put an end to most of the resistance to surgery. In 1731, the Royal Academy of Surgery was created. We really do have Felix de Tassy and King Louis's butt woes to thank for a great deal of medical advancement thereafter. Next time you go to the doctor, give that a thought. It's lots of fun to joke about and rag on the nobles of Versailles. They truthfully were not very intelligent a lot of the time, and were often really nasty and power-hungry. Wealth and greed does that to people, especially a population of people isolated from real life in the insular, lavish world of the Chateau de Versailles. But in this era, riches couldn't buy them their way out of pain and medical strife, often brought upon themselves by their own poor, money-fueled choices. Nature comes for us all in its own way, and nobody wants to suffer. It makes sense that hearing of this grand operation, so widely regaled as a wondrous, miraculous cure for the king's illness, would inspire people to seek out the same treatment. I don't think that indicates madness. Sometimes it's just misinformed desperation. I have personally dealt with too many condescending doctors in my own health troubles to judge these people too harshly on that. Historical tales such as this one are a persistent game of telephone. One brief quote retold over the course of centuries eventually ends with us having a twisted idea of what people in the past were like. In many ways, we're not all that different. Like those French aristocrats, people today will do crazy things to try and find a cure and feel better. I think back to the ivermectin craze during the early COVID years, or the myriad of random cures for cancer you can see on the internet at any given point. Suffering an illness can do horrid things to a person and the ability to make logical decisions. So per usual, all this is my plea for us to remind ourselves to be compassionate and to think harder about how we perceive other people. even the ones who are a lot of fun to ridicule. Thank you for learning with me about a surgeon and a royal pain in the ass. I hope you enjoyed it. I certainly love getting to do these more sleuthy videos. Don't forget to grab yourself a copy of my graphic novel, Liberated, The Radical Art and Life of Claude Cahun. And until next time, wash thy hands, wear thy mask, and eat more fiber.